Welcome to the world of TrendPod AI. Okay, let's unpack this. We're jumping straight into, well, a fascinating and, complex area where presidential power, trade policy, and the U.S. legal system all meet. The focus today is a really significant recent court ruling. It threw quite a spotlight on some of the tariffs put in place by former President Trump.
Right, and we've been digging through a report covering this specific court decision, looking at the reactions, and importantly, trying to analyze what happens next.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to give you the essential takeaways from that material. We want to understand who actually challenged these tariffs, what the court decided the issue was, what the immediate effects are, and what it could signal for trade policy for businesses trying to navigate all this. It's complicated stuff, but we'll guide you through the key points quickly.
So first off, who took this to court? The sources say this ruling came from two separate cases that got combined. One was started by the Liberty Justice Center. They were representing several smaller businesses, companies that import goods.
Smaller businesses. That's interesting. Not necessarily the huge corporations you might expect first. And the second group?
That was a group of U.S. state governments. Together, they were basically bringing the first major legal challenge against these particular tariffs, the ones sometimes called the Liberation Day tariffs.
And they took it to the Court of International Trade.
Yeah, exactly. The specialized federal court that handles exactly these kinds of trade disputes.
Got it. So the experts. Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
What did this court actually decide? What was the core finding?
This is the heart of it. The judges, a 3-judge panel, looked very closely at the specific legal authority President Trump used. He cited something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, from 1977.
Right, IEEPA. Isn't it usually for things like freezing assets of hostile governments, not broad tariffs on goods?
That's the typical use, yes. And that was central to the court's finding. And they basically said IEPA did not give the president the power to impose such, sweeping tariffs on almost every country. They were really clear. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress the exclusive power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. That's Congress's job.
Okay.
And the court said that constitutional power isn't just overridden by the president invoking emergency authority under IEPA, even if the stated goal was protecting the economy.
So the court's basically saying, hold on, Mr. President. That specific law, IEPA, that doesn't give you the authority for this kind of broad tariff action, that power belongs to Congress.
Precisely. The ruling also specifically struck down a separate batch of tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada, which the administration had sort of linked to issues like drug flows. But it's really important to note what the ruling didn't cover.
Right.
It didn't touch tariffs on specific products like steel or aluminum or cars. Those were imposed using different laws, things like national security provisions. And those laws weren't challenged in this specific case.
Okay, so it's targeted. It challenges the use of IEPA for those broad tariffs, but leaves alone tariffs imposed under other laws, like national security or specific trade acts. Makes sense. So how did people react? This seems like a pretty big deal legally.
Well, as you'd guess, the reactions kind of split along the lines you'd expect, reflecting views on the trade policies themselves. The source mentions former President Trump criticized the ruling publicly on social media, arguing the president needs tools like this to protect the U.S. economy.
And on the other side, those who brought the challenge.
Yeah, the Attorney General of New York, for instance, one of the states involved, welcomed the decision. Their perspective, as reported, was that no president should have this kind of power to just unilaterally raise taxes through tariffs by declaring an emergency.
Very clear opposing views there. Okay, so for businesses, consumers, governments, the big question is what happens right now? The source seems clear that at this moment, the tariffs are actually still being applied.
That's the crucial point for now.
Yeah.
The White House is appealing the ruling. So even though this court said the legal basis wasn't sound for these specific tariffs, the tariffs stay in place while that appeal process goes forward.
So businesses are still paying these import taxes today?
Yes. Comments from former customs officials cited in the report confirm that. Tariffs will continue to be collected at the border. Any chance of refunds? Well, that only happens if the White House ultimately loses the appeal and this ruling stands.
Okay, refunds may be down the road, but payment needed now. So how does this ruling and all the uncertainty around the appeal, how does that affect trade negotiations that might be happening?
Yeah, it definitely complicates things. The White House had actually argued in court that overturning the tariffs would weaken their hand in trade talks.
Yeah.
Analysts suggest other countries might now sort of pause, wait to see how the appeal turns out before making major commitments or concessions linked to these tariffs.
That certainly throws a wrench into the works. What about that recent UK-US deal, the one that lowered some tariffs? Does this ruling mess with that?
Well, the source suggests the parts of the UK deal related to steel, aluminum, cars, those are probably okay because, like we said, different legal basis.
Right, different laws.
But the ruling does directly hit the 10% sort of blanket tariff on most other goods, which was part of that challenged IEPA group. So the report mentions there's definitely uncertainty about how that specific piece of the UK agreement might play out, especially since it's not even fully implemented yet.
Fascinating. So the immediate picture is definitely uncertainty waiting on the appeal, which could potentially go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But let's think longer term. Let's say this ruling is eventually upheld. Does that mean a president just can't impose broad tariffs anymore? Is that tool gone?
That's a really interesting question, and the ruling itself offers some clues. The court didn't say presidents have no tariff power at all. In fact, it specifically acknowledged that presidents do have authority under other laws. For example, the source notes the ruling mentioned a power to impose tariffs up to 15% for 150 days, specifically to deal with balance of trade problems.
Okay. So a different legal path exists, but maybe it's more limited, shorter term.
Exactly. It seems like a temporary measure, not the kind of broad, long-term lever that was attempted with IEPA here. And the court also didn't touch the president's ability to use other, more established trade laws, like those focused on national security, which we mentioned, or unfair trade practices.
Right.
Those laws usually involve more process, like formal investigations, public comment periods. It's generally slower, more transparent than just invoking emergency powers.
I see.
The source even flags a potentially powerful, though maybe untested, bit in a 1930 trade law. It could allow tariffs up to 50% against countries seen as discriminating against U.S. commerce.
So, okay, while this ruling shut down using IEEPA for these specific sweeping tariffs, it didn't exactly wipe out the president's ability to use tariffs altogether. It sounds more like it's about which legal tool fits which situation.
That really seems to be the key takeaway. It challenged the specific legal basis and the method used for these tariffs, not necessarily the whole idea of presidential tariff power, if used under different laws and potentially different circumstances.
Okay, right. Let's try and bring this all together for you listening. The core tension we've explored in this deep dive is pretty clear. You have a court ruling that pushes back hard on the legal foundation for some of former President Trump's broad tariffs, really emphasizing Congress's constitutional power over commerce.
But, and this is crucial to remember, because the ruling is being appealed, those tariffs are still being collected right now.